You're a useless failure. A real man would satisfy me." That's what my wife screamed, spit flying, eyes filled with rage, as she stormed out of our home with her arm wrapped around my younger brother. They kissed in front of me like I didn't exist. It was a final insult after 10 years of marriage. Years I thought were built on loyalty, love, and partnership. But here's the thing. I wasn't shocked, because I already knew. I knew about the motel visits, the secret credit cards, the lies, the plans they were making behind my back. I knew the woman I gave my heart to, and the brother I grew up with, had been betraying me for nearly a year. What they didn't know was that I had been quietly planning something, too. And by the time they realized it, they were drowning. And I was already walking away, stronger, smarter, and 10 steps ahead. Thank you for watching, brothers. If you've ever been called not enough, just know that was their fear talking, not your truth. Comment your story below. I read every one. Smash that like button if this hit home. Subscribe and share if you're done letting betrayal define you. If this resonates with you, drop a 1 in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Because real men don't just survive betrayal, we rebuild better. Kevin was the kind of man people called steady. At 38, he wasn't flashy or loud, just consistent. The one who showed up on time, paid his bills early, and never forgot an anniversary. He worked in IT as a systems analyst, the kind of job no one really understood, but everyone relied on. His home sat on a quiet street just outside Austin, Texas. 3 bedrooms, a modest yard, and a covered porch where he and his wife, Rachel, would drink coffee on lazy Saturday mornings. They'd been married for 10 years, together for 12. No kids, just them and the life they were building. Kevin used to think that was enough. Rachel was beautiful in a way that never tried too hard. Shoulder-length brunette hair, sharp green eyes, a laugh that used to fill every corner of the house. She worked in marketing and always had ideas bouncing around in her head. Campaigns, brand pitches, social media strategies. Where Kevin was grounded, Rachel had a spark. They balanced each other, or at least that's what he thought. Their life was simple. Weeknights were for cooking dinner together, binge-watching old seasons of The Office, or planning future vacations they never quite took. Weekends meant grocery runs, backyard barbecues, and occasional Sunday brunch with Kevin's younger brother, Eric, who lived downtown. And then there were the dreams. Someday, sell a house and move to Colorado. Kevin wanted a cabin near the mountains, something quiet and surrounded by pine. Rachel said she'd open a boutique, or maybe do remote marketing for small businesses. It all sounded nice, like something worth working toward. But then things started to shift, subtle, like hairline cracks in a foundation. At first, Kevin couldn't even pinpoint what was different. Rachel began working late more often. Her phone, once left charging openly on the kitchen counter, was suddenly always face down, sometimes taken into the bathroom. When he asked, she brushed it off. Client stuff. NDA. You know how it is. He didn't, not really, but he nodded anyway. The intimacy changed, too. At first, it was occasional. She was tired, had a headache, too stressed. Then weeks passed. Then months. He missed the way she used to touch his arm when she passed by, the way she used to laugh at his dumb jokes, the way she used to lean into him on the couch instead of sitting on the opposite end, scrolling on her phone. Kevin tried to tell himself this was just a rough patch, that every couple goes through dry spells. He even blamed himself. Maybe he was too boring, too predictable. Maybe she was just going through something and didn't want to talk about it. He asked once if everything was okay. Rachel looked up from her laptop, blinked like he'd interrupted something important, and said, "You always overthink everything, Kevin. It's exhausting." That stuck with him. It planted doubt where there had once been trust. He started to question himself. Maybe she was right. Maybe he was a problem. It was Memorial Day weekend when everything finally snapped into focus. Rachel had mentioned she needed to run a few errands before the cookout. She kissed Kevin on the cheek like always, grabbed her keys, and left wearing the sundress he liked, the blue one with the thin straps and the soft fabric that flowed when she walked. He didn't think much of it at first. Just another holiday, another family afternoon. Kevin stayed home to prep, marinate the ribs, stock the cooler. sweep the patio. The propane tank was running low, though, so he texted Rachel to grab a refill while she was out. No response. He called, straight to voicemail. That was the first tug in his chest, subtle but sharp. Still, he figured she was busy or in a dead zone. He decided to go get the propane himself. The hardware store was just a few miles away, but he took a back road to avoid holiday traffic. That's when he passed the old roadside motel, the kind with flickering neon signs and single-story rooms lined up like a row of forgotten secrets. Something made him slow down. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was dread. And then he saw them. Rachel's silver SUV and Eric's black BMW, parked side by side in front of room 214. His stomach dropped. It wasn't the kind of shock that made you slam the brakes. It was colder than that. Quieter. A kind of numb realization that settled over him like frost. He pulled into a lot across the street and just sat there, engine idling, the world moving in slow motion. He stared at the two cars, watched the door to the room, but never saw anyone come out. His hands trembled as he pulled out his phone and took a photo, wide enough to capture both license plates. He zoomed in, adjusted the angle, took another, then sat back in silence. There was a war inside him, the kind of heartbreak that begged to scream, to explode, to charge into that motel and demand answers. But something deeper kept him still. He'd been blind for long enough. He wasn't going to be stupid now. He went home, dropped the propane by the grill, and kept prepping like nothing happened. When Rachel returned around noon with a Target bag and a too-wide smile, he just nodded and asked her to help load the coolers. She didn't mention the voicemail, didn't mention the propane. Her hair was slightly tousled, lips a bit too glossy. Kevin watched every movement, every lie wrapped in familiarity. She still smelled like lavender lotion, and cologne that wasn't his. By 2, the backyard was full of chatter, laughter, clinking glasses, and the smell of grilled meat. Eric showed up an hour late, blaming traffic, wearing mirrored sunglasses, and that forced grin he always used when he was bluffing. Rachel laughed too hard at one of his jokes. Kevin noticed how they avoided each other just enough to seem casual. Never too close, never too far. But their eyes met when they thought no one was looking. Kevin played the perfect host. He handed out beers, flipped the ribs, smiled when people complimented the food, all while his mind was replaying every moment from the last year in a new light. The late nights, the arguments, the distance. It all made sense now, and it made him sick. After the guests left and the dishes were rinsed, Rachel started giving him sideways glances as they moved around the kitchen in silence. Finally, she asked, "What's with you today?" Her tone was tired, irritated. Kevin set down the dish towel, turned to her, and said quietly, "I saw your car at the motel, next to Eric's." The room froze. She didn't flinch, didn't lie, just stared at him for a moment, then sighed. "It's been 8 months," she said, "since last fall." Her voice was flat, unapologetic. "I didn't mean for it to happen, but it did." She shrugged, as if she were admitting she dropped a glass and didn't feel like cleaning it up. "We didn't plan it, Kevin, but it's real." He stared at her, the weight of a decade crashing over him in a tidal wave of disbelief and grief. "So that's it?" he asked. "You burn everything down for this?" She stepped forward, eyes now sharp and cold. "You want the truth? Fine. You're boring, predictable. You do everything right, but there's no fire, no edge. You just exist." Her voice cracked, not with sorrow but contempt. "Eric makes me feel alive. He gives me what you never could. You're a failure, Kevin." He stood there, jaw clenched, heart thudding in his chest, but his voice was steady when he finally replied, "Then you'd better go live your exciting new life." She grabbed her purse, didn't even look back as she walked out the door. Kevin didn't yell. He didn't throw anything or beg her to stay. He didn't even cry. The silence he gave Rachel as she left was louder than any outburst he could have managed. When the front door clicked shut behind her, he stood there for a moment, breathing through the pain like a man trying to hold his ribs together after a fall. Then he packed a small duffel bag with clothes, his laptop, and some personal documents, locked the house behind him, and drove to a cheap extended stay hotel on the edge of town. He didn't tell anyone where he was going, not even his parents. He needed time, and more importantly, he needed distance to think without the weight of her perfume still clinging to the furniture. The next morning, he walked into a law office downtown. The receptionist gave him a clipboard and a sympathetic smile, the kind people reserve for quiet men who look like they've just been hit by a truck. The attorney's name was Elise Novak, mid-40s, sharp-eyed, and professional to the point of intimidation. Kevin laid out the situation without sugarcoating it. She's been cheating on me for 8 months with my brother. I have photos of their cars at a motel. Elise nodded slowly, tapping her pen. In this state, adultery can still impact divorce settlements. But we'll need more than just a picture in a parking lot. Kevin leaned forward. There's more. I just haven't looked yet. That night, back at the hotel, he remembered the iPad sitting in the drawer by their bed at home. Technically his iPad, but Rachel had used it a lot when they first got it. He hadn't touched it in months. The next morning, he returned to the house while she was at work, let himself in, and found it where he remembered, dusty but fully charged. He sat at the kitchen table, heart pounding, and powered it on. What he found made his hands go cold. Rachel's phone had synced automatically to the iCloud account they once shared. Her photos, text messages, calendar events, everything was still there. He didn't have to guess anymore. There were screenshots of hotel reservations under fake names, saved messages between her and Eric that read like scenes from a bad romance novel, pictures of them together at restaurants, in bed, in hotel mirrors. One image hit him like a punch to the gut. The two of them holding champagne glasses in a suite with a card on the table that said happy birthday. 3 days after she told Kevin she had to work late, he closed the photo app and sat back in his chair, swallowing hard. She hadn't just cheated. She had rewritten their life together in real time, while he was still living in it. But something changed inside him right then. The grief didn't go away. It stayed, heavy and raw, but a colder feeling rose through it. Focus, clarity. She thought he would crumble, that he'd give up, hand over the house, and walk away like a wounded dog. But Kevin wasn't done. Not by a long shot. He didn't sleep that night. Kevin sat in the dim glow of the hotel room desk lamp, going through every folder, message thread, and digital breadcrumb Rachel had carelessly left behind. What began as confirmation of betrayal turned into a revelation of just how deep the deception ran. In her bookmarked Chrome tabs was a folder labeled Big Day. His stomach turned as he opened it. Inside were links to wedding venues, photographers, a resort in Bali that offered luxury honeymoon packages starting at $30,000. There were dress styles saved, a Pinterest board full of custom vows, even a to-do checklist that included things like break the news to Kevin nicely and talk to Eric about prenup. They were planning a wedding before the ink on the divorce papers had even dried, before they were even filed. And worse, they were doing it using the money he had been earning while she was supposedly stressed about finances. For months, she had claimed they needed to budget better. Cut back on dinners out, delay fixing the leak in the upstairs shower. All while she and Eric were sipping champagne in private suites and dreaming about a beachfront ceremony. Digging deeper into her Gmail, Kevin found something that nearly made his heart stop. Confirmation emails from 3 credit card companies. Cards he'd never seen, never approved, and certainly never used. He cross-checked the balances and found the numbers staring back at him like accusations. $48,000, $62,000, and another one nearing its limit at $70,000. A total of $180,000 in new debt, all acquired within the last year. The purchases were as bold as they were careless. Designer shoes, luxury handbags, spa weekends, flights, and more hotel stays than he could count. Kevin's jaw clenched as he opened a spreadsheet and began documenting every transaction, sorting them by date and amount, marking which ones had happened while he was home working late or planning their anniversary. The betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore. It was financial, calculated, and criminally stupid. Then, as he scrolled further through her messages, another name popped up, his own. A message thread from Eric, buried months back, referencing the money Kevin lent me back when I was job hunting. That alone would have been enough to ignite anger, but the message continued. Don't worry. He won't come after me for it. He's too nice for that. Always has been. Kevin had almost forgotten about that loan. $15,000, no interest, given without hesitation when Eric had hit a rough patch 2 years earlier. He hadn't seen a dime back, and to be honest, hadn't asked. Family helped family. Or so he thought. Now he knew better. By morning, Kevin had a plan. He called the bank and froze the joint account. He rerouted his direct deposit to a personal account Rachel didn't know existed. He pulled the last 3 pay stubs and submitted documentation to his attorney, showing that he'd been the sole financial provider for the past year. He gathered everything, screenshots, photos, email logs, transaction records, and dropped them off at Elisa's office in a manila envelope. She opened the folder, flipped through a few pages, then looked up at him with something new in her expression. Respect. "You've done half my job already," she said. "This changes everything." Back at the house later that day, Kevin stood in the bedroom he used to share with Rachel and looked around. The bed was made perfectly, but it didn't feel like a place where love had lived. It felt like a showroom, staged, curated, fake. She had built an entire fantasy life on his time, his patience, and his money, and she truly believed he would never fight back, that he would roll over and let them walk into the sunset together while he quietly faded into the background. But Rachel and Eric had made one fatal mistake. They mistook kindness for weakness. And now, Kevin was going to show them the difference. Kevin didn't hesitate. He moved like a man who had been waiting for this moment, not with rage, but with precision. By the time Rachel woke up the next morning in the house they once shared, she no longer had access to their joint account. The banking app gave her an error message. Her debit card declined. Her automatic payments failed one after another. Kevin had drained his half of everything. Transfer it to a private account in his name only, supported by the legal advice Elise had laid out for him. He also flagged every shared credit card and filed fraud alerts on the ones he never signed for. Rachel's financial world was quietly collapsing, and she had no idea why. She texted within hours. "Hey, babe, something's wrong with our account. Can you check? I think the bank messed up." He didn't respond. A few hours later, another message came through, shorter, colder. "Kevin, I can't access the money. What the hell is going on?" Still, he said nothing. Silence had become his armor, not out of cruelty. He wasn't trying to hurt her, but because he knew now that words were wasted on people who used them as weapons. Eric called the next day. The voicemail started casual, like nothing had happened. "Hey man, just checking in. Ratch said there's some banking weirdness. Hope everything's cool. Maybe we can all talk this out soon." The voice was smooth, rehearsed. Kevin had heard that tone before, back when Eric was trying to sweet-talk their parents into letting him borrow their car in high school, or when he begged Kevin for help with rent during his broke months in his 20s. That charm had always worked on people. But not anymore. Kevin archived the voicemail, attached it to a timeline he was building on his laptop. Every call, every message, every lie, they were all going into a case file. He wasn't just preparing emotionally, he was preparing legally. Elise had been crystal clear. Documentation would be everything. And Kevin had evidence now that told a story far louder than his voice ever could. He dug out the original loan agreement from when he'd helped Eric, an informal but signed note scribbled during a family Christmas, promising to pay him back within a year. That paper, long forgotten in a drawer, was now gold. He scanned it, time-stamped it, and sent to Elise with short message. "Let's add this to the list." Every action he took was measured. No angry texts. No public outbursts. He began compiling a spreadsheet of Rachel's unauthorized credit charges, categorizing them into luxury, travel, hotel, entertainment. He even made a section labeled "While I was working late," highlighting purchases that happened during the same hours he was busting his back trying to save their finances. He wasn't just building a case. He was reclaiming control. The coldness inside him wasn't hatred. It was clarity. For the first time in months, maybe even years, Kevin felt focused. Sharp. He wasn't going to scream. He wasn't going to beg. He was going to win, one calculated step at a time. Kevin had stopped going to the coffee shop near his old neighborhood, but that morning he felt drawn to it. like a gut instinct telling him something was about to shift. He'd just want a quiet seat by the window, his usual black coffee, and a few hours with his laptop to organize more of the growing archive that would eventually bury Rachel and Eric in court. But fate, it seemed, had a sense of irony, because as he walked in, letting the door swing close behind him with the soft jingle of the entrance bell, his eyes locked onto a scene that could have been scripted in a drama. Rachel and Eric sat at a corner table near the far wall. They weren't holding hands. They weren't smiling. Rachel's eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale and hollow. Eric, in contrast, looked tense, jaw locked, fingers drumming the side of his coffee, cup like a man doing everything in his power not to explode. Kevin paused for only a second, then turned calmly and took a seat near the front, hidden just enough to watch but not be noticed. Rachel was whispering urgently, her hands flailing more with each passing second. Eric didn't respond. He stared at his phone, unmoved, uninterested. And then it happened. She reached across the table to grab his arm, pleading, but he yanked it away with force. People turned, heads swiveled. A quiet hush swept across the cafe. Rachel stood up suddenly, her chair scraping the floor loudly. Eric stood too, hissing something at her under his breath, and stormed out, leaving her standing there alone and visibly shaking. She looked around in a daze, and for a brief moment, Kevin thought she might see him, but she didn't. He left before she could, walking out the side door without finishing his coffee, heart steady, face unreadable. That night, the messages began. First, it was a simple, "Hey, do you have a minute?" Then, "Please, I just need to talk." Kevin ignored everyone. Then came the calls, unanswered, and then came the back channels. His friend Chris, who used to work with Eric, texted him out of the blue. "Man, I gotta tell you something. You won't believe it." They met for a drink that evening, and Kevin listened as Chris laid it all out. Eric had been fired 3 weeks ago. Apparently, one of the clients had reported him for inappropriate conduct. Add that to missing deadlines and showing up late, and the company cut him loose on the spot. He's been asking around, trying to borrow money from anyone who'll listen, Chris added, shaking his head. Told me he and Rachel were planning to buy a house. Kevin blinked. Buy? With what money? Chris gave a bitter laugh. That's the crazy part. They were applying for a mortgage using false income statements. Claimed Eric had a consulting business and listed your house as pending sale, like they were banking on cashing out half of it. But the loan company flagged it for fraud. They got denied. It all made sense now. The panic, the unraveling. Kevin sat back in his seat, absorbing it like a man watching a slow-motion crash he had already predicted. And then Chris added the final blow. Rachel found out Eric's been messaging some girl from a gym. Apparently, it's not the first time. She went ballistic. I think they're done. Done. Broke. Unemployed. And now, turning back to the man they thought they'd left behind. The next morning, Kevin received a call from a number he didn't recognize. It was Rachel's mother. Her voice was tight, guarded. Kevin, I'm not trying to take sides, but Rachel's in a bad place. She says you've frozen her out financially and emotionally. She's struggling. Kevin almost laughed. Struggling? She was sipping champagne with his brother while planning a secret wedding 3 weeks ago. Now she wanted sympathy. He kept his response short. I suggest she speak with her lawyer and a therapist. After that, it was like the dam broke. Rachel's cousin messaged him on Instagram. Her aunt left a voicemail. Even Eric's own sister, who Kevin hadn't spoken to in years, texted him a long paragraph about forgiveness and family. But Kevin stayed silent, not because he was cruel, but because he knew the version of Rachel they were talking about didn't exist anymore. That woman had died the moment she turned her back on everything they'd built and spat the words, "You're a failure." Now she was learning what real consequences looked like. And Kevin? He was only getting started. It was a Saturday morning when Kevin heard the desperate pounding on his door. The kind of knock that sounded like panic, like someone trying not just to be heard, but to be saved. He checked the peephole, and there she was, Rachel, standing in the hallway of his apartment building, hair a mess, mascara streaked down her cheeks, wearing a hoodie 3 sizes too big, and clutching a duffel bag like her life depended on it. For a split second, something in him stirred. Not love, not sympathy exactly, but maybe recognition. The last time he'd seen her this raw was when her father passed away 6 years ago. But that Rachel was a woman he trusted. The one standing at his door now was a stranger. He opened it, blocking the entrance with his body. "I just need a place to stay," she said, voice cracking. "Just for a few days. Please, Kevin." The hallway was empty, the world silent except for her breath hitching in her throat. He didn't say anything, just stepped aside. "Only for a few minutes," he added. "We'll talk inside." She walked in slowly, like she expected the floor to collapse under her weight. She didn't sit, didn't even put her bag down, just stood in the center of his small living room, surrounded by the life he'd built after her. The clean lines, the quiet space, the things she used to mock as too minimal, now making her look even more out of place. "Eric left," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He sold my car behind my back to pay off some gambling debt. Said he was going to fix things. Then he disappeared. I don't even know where he is." Kevin leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. "And now you're here." Rachel nodded, her eyes searching his face for anything familiar. "I made a mistake," she said. "I know that now. You were the stable one. The good one. He was just exciting. But that excitement burned out fast." She took a step closer. "I don't have anywhere to go." Kevin exhaled slowly, then walked to his desk drawer. He pulled out an envelope and handed it to her. "You might want to read this before you ask for anything else." She looked confused, but opened it. Inside was a cease and desist letter, prepared and signed by Elise, his attorney. The reason? Rachel had attempted to open a credit card in Kevin's name just 2 weeks earlier, using his social security number, probably hoping he wouldn't notice while she scrambled to keep her lifestyle from collapsing. Her face went white. "Kevin, I didn't mean to," but the words caught in her throat. She crumbled onto the couch, the letter slipping from her fingers. "I thought I could fix it. I didn't think it would go through. I was desperate." Kevin didn't raise his voice. He didn't move toward her. He simply said, "You thought I'd be your safety net. Again, after everything." Rachel buried her face in her hands. "He used me. Eric lied about everything. His job, his money, his plans. He said we'd start over. He said you'd be fine, that you didn't care. But it was all fake. Everything was fake. And I left the one person who ever actually showed up for me." She looked up at him then, tears streaming. "I don't expect you to forgive me. But please, just help me get back on my feet. Just a week. I'll figure the rest out." Kevin walked to a window, stared out at the street below. The city looked the same. Cars rolling past. People walking dogs. Life continuing as if none of this had happened. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think strength meant keeping quiet. Letting things go. Being the bigger person. And maybe that's why you thought you could walk over me. Maybe you mistook calm for weakness." He turned back to face her. "But I was always strong, Rachel. You just didn't know what strength looked like." She opened her mouth to respond, but he held up a hand. "You need to leave now. I won't call the police, but if you try to use my name again, financially or otherwise, you'll wish I had." She stood, shoulders shaking, picking up her bag without another word. At the door, she looked back once, and for a moment Kevin saw it. The regret, the realization, the weight of her own undoing finally settling on her like a storm she couldn't escape. Then she left, and he closed the door without looking back. 3 weeks later, the divorce hearing took place in a quiet courtroom with gray carpet and dim lighting that made everything feel colder than it already was. Kevin sat beside Elise, composed in a navy suit that fit better than anything he'd worn in years. Across the aisle, Rachel sat alone, dressed in borrowed clothes that didn't fit her usual polished appearance. Her hair was tied back hastily, her shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. The judge didn't take long. With the documentation Kevin had provided, fraudulent credit accounts, proof of adultery and financial mismanagement, the decision was swift and clear. Kevin retained full ownership of the house and his retirement accounts. Rachel, the judge ruled, was solely responsible for the debt she had acquired without his knowledge. No alimony, no division of assets, just a clean, brutal split. Outside the courthouse, Rachel approached him one last time. Her voice was soft, almost unfamiliar. "I know I don't deserve anything from you, but for what it's worth, I'm sorry, Kevin, for all of it." He nodded, not out of forgiveness, but closure. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Rachel," he said, and he meant it. He wasn't angry anymore. Just done. She moved back in with her parents on the outskirts of town. He heard from a neighbor that she picked up a retail job at a local boutique and was barely scraping by. Eric disappeared entirely. Rumors floated around that he had moved to Vegas, chasing some new scheme, but no one knew for sure. His social media accounts were silent, and none of the family brought his name up anymore. Kevin, on the other hand, was rebuilding not just his finances, but his life. He sold the house he and Rachel had shared, not because he had to, but because it no longer felt like home. He bought a condo downtown with clean lines and warm lighting, a space that was entirely his, untouched by betrayal. He started going to the gym again, not out of vanity, but out of discipline. There was something grounding in the routine, sweat, breath, focus. He went on coffee dates, nothing serious, but enough to remember what it felt like to laugh without suspicion. One evening, sitting on his new balcony as the city buzzed quietly below, Kevin thought about how much had changed in a year. How the man who once believed silence was strength had learned that boundaries were even stronger, that protecting your peace sometimes meant walking away from people who wanted you broken. He remembered how they had looked so certain, so smug, when they thought they had the upper hand. When Rachel told him he was boring. When Eric smirked like betrayal was just another thrill. But fantasy has a way of falling apart under pressure. And that's exactly what they had built. A fantasy. One based on lies, lust, and the foolish idea that the world owed them something. Kevin took a sip of his drink and leaned back in his chair, letting the quiet settle around him. "They built a fantasy," he whispered to himself. "I built my future. And this time, it was one no one could take from him. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted with everything? Someone you never thought would hurt you? When the dust finally settled, what did that betrayal teach you about yourself? About your strength? Your worth? Your boundaries? I'd love to hear your story. Drop it in the comments, because sometimes the best healing comes from knowing we're not alone. Sometimes revenge isn't about shouting, slamming doors, or making a scene. It's not rage or retaliation. Sometimes real revenge is peace, the kind that comes when you stop trying to fix what someone else broke and start building something stronger for yourself. It's waking up every morning without bitterness in your chest. It's rebuilding your life so solid that their absence doesn't leave a dent. It's success, not just in your career or finances, but in your mindset, your growth, your ability to move forward without dragging their mess behind you. It's knowing your value, finally and fully, and refusing to settle for less ever again. It's walking away with your head high while they stumble through the consequences of their own choices. And the best part? You didn't have to destroy them. They did that all on their own. You just moved on.